I faked my own funeral to see who cared, but what I discovered destroyed my life. I'm not exactly proud of what I did, but if you're reading this, you probably understand the morbid curiosity that drives people to extremes. It all started about 6 months ago, when I hit rock bottom emotionally. I'd lost my job, my girlfriend had left me for someone richer, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. The thing that gutted me the most was the nagging suspicion that nobody, not even my so-called best friends or my estranged family, would bat an eye if I vanished. So, I hatched an idea that sounds insane even as I write it. I would fake my own death and attend my funeral in disguise. I thought it would be a twisted way to see who actually cared. Maybe, in some dark corner of my mind, I hoped to watch everyone weep and regret how they'd treated me. I spent weeks planning every detail. I worked remotely in cybersecurity for years, so faking records wasn't as impossible as it sounds. I rented a shabby studio apartment under a false name in a neighboring city. I even convinced an old contact to help me create the paperwork to declare me presumed deceased after a hiking accident. No body, just my car abandoned on a rural trailhead, keys on the seat, and my phone smashed in the dirt. I left a few personal effects in the trunk, stuff only I'd have. It was enough. The cops searched for me for 3 days. My mom and dad were devastated, according to my cousin. Friends posted about it online, sharing old photos of me with hashtags like #GoneTooSoon and #RIPAdam. A memorial service was arranged the following Saturday. That was when it really sank in. As far as the world was concerned, I was dead. I felt something between horror and a sick thrill. It was working. On the day of the funeral, I put on an oversized black suit I'd borrowed from a thrift store and a pair of cheap sunglasses. I even added a fake beard. My heart nearly exploded when I walked into the church. No one looked twice at me, just another mourner paying respects. I stayed near the back pew and watched people file in. My parents sat stiffly at the front, my mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My dad kept staring straight ahead like he was in shock. But what rattled me most was seeing my ex, Clara. She walked in on the arm of Kyle, my former best friend. They looked together. Two together. She wore a somber black dress, but she clung to his hand like he was her lifeline. My gut twisted. I felt like a fool. Then came the eulogies. One after another, people stood up to share stories. Some were sweet. Some were shallow. A few sounded forced, like they didn't know what else to say. But when Kyle got up, everything changed. He cleared his throat and started recounting memories I thought only he and I shared, late nights gaming in high school, getting wasted on cheap vodka in college, the time I covered for him when he crashed his mom's car. For a second, I almost forgot I was supposed to be dead. Then he said something that made my breath stop. Adam was complicated. He was my brother in everything but blood. But he carried secrets, and I hope, wherever he is, he's finally at peace with them. He didn't elaborate. He just looked down at Clara, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes shining with tears. It felt like the room closed in on me. What secrets? What did they know? When the service ended, I slipped out before the reception. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might actually collapse and die for real. I had wanted to see who cared. Instead, I learned there were things people had been saying behind my back, things I didn't understand. I returned to the dingy apartment, ripped off the disguise, and stared at myself in the mirror. I'd faked my own death, and now I was more alone than ever. But something about Kyle's words gnawed at me. What secrets was he talking about? And why did Clara look so guilty? I decided right then, if I'd gone this far, I wasn't stopping. I was going to find out exactly what everyone had been hiding. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kyle's face as he said I carried secrets. And Clara, God, the look in her eyes was worse than any eulogy. The next morning, I did what any sane person who faked their own funeral would do. I started stalking everyone who'd been at the service. First up was Kyle. I knew him better than anyone. He was predictable, in a way that used to comfort me. He liked routine, same coffee shop every Monday and Wednesday, same gym at 6 p.m. I waited across the street from the cafe, hidden behind a newspaper like some bad movie cliché, but he never showed. By the second day, I realized he'd taken the week off work. The manager at his office, a guy who didn't know me by sight, mentioned he was taking time to grieve. But that didn't add up. Kyle wasn't the kind of person who grieved. He was the kind of person who adapted. Who replaced. Who moved on. So I shifted my focus to Clara. She was harder to track. She'd changed her phone number after we broke up. But I still knew her mother's address, where she sometimes stayed when she was stressed. I parked my car a block away and waited. Hours passed. Just as I was about to give up, Clara's old Toyota pulled into the driveway. She got out, wearing leggings and an oversized hoodie, hair piled in a messy bun. She looked exhausted. When she turned toward the front door, I saw it. Her hand slipped down to her stomach for just a second, pressing lightly as though it ached. A cold realization dawned. Pregnant. It explained a lot. The sudden breakup, the way she'd clung to Kyle at the funeral. But there was no proof yet, and I wasn't about to jump to conclusions. I waited until she went inside, then got out of the car and crept closer. Her mom's house was old, the windows still fitted with flimsy blinds. I felt sick with guilt, but I needed to know. When I peeked through a gap in the blinds, I saw her hugging her mother. Her mom was saying something, her lips moving fast, worried. Clara was crying. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. "You need to tell him, it isn't fair to Adam, Kyle can't." Clara pulled away, wiping her face. "He's gone, Mom. It doesn't matter anymore." Her mother said something too quiet to catch, and Clara shook her head. "I'm doing what's best for everyone." I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to piece it together. Was the baby mine? Or Kyle's? And what the hell did she mean by doing what's best for everyone? The next morning, I made another decision that pushed me even further down the rabbit hole. I called my old coworker, Nadia. She was the only person I trusted enough to risk contacting. When she picked up, I disguised my voice, telling her I was a private investigator working on behalf of the family to wrap up my affairs. I asked if she knew anything unusual, anything I'd left unresolved. Nadia hesitated. "Well, I don't want to spread gossip, but there was that weird email." "What email?" I demanded. "About a month before you disappeared. It was from a generic account, like some encrypted service. It said you'd been embezzling money from the company. But it didn't seem credible. Management dismissed it after an internal audit, but I don't know, Adam. A lot of people started whispering that you'd run off because you were guilty." My head spun. I had never stolen a cent. But someone had tried to smear me, someone who knew exactly when to drop that bomb. Maybe it was all connected. Clara's pregnancy. Kyle's sudden closeness to her. The accusation that I was a thief. Maybe faking my death wasn't just an act of desperation. Maybe it was the only reason I discovered any of this at all. I hung up and sat in silence. Outside, dawn was breaking over the rooftops, but it felt like the end of the world. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I needed to dig deeper, and I needed to be careful. I was already in too deep to back out. So I started making a list, everyone who stood to benefit from my death. And Kyle and Clara were right at the top. By the end of that week, I'd convinced myself I was circling something big, something that went way beyond my bruised ego. I spent days piecing together timelines. When had Clara and I actually started to fall apart? When had Kyle slid into her life? And who would have planted the embezzlement rumor? I realized I needed more than assumptions. I needed proof. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I broke into Kyle's condo. Before you judge me, understand this. I'd been to his place 100 times. I knew the spare key he kept duct-taped under the railing of the balcony. He always joked no one would ever think to look there. Apparently, he was right. It was past midnight when I climbed the stairs and let myself in. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key. The place smelled the same, cheap air freshener and old pizza boxes. The living room was cluttered with beer bottles and a stack of unopened mail. I moved carefully, listening for any sign he might be home. But the condo was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I started in the office. Kyle never locked his laptop. That, at least, hadn't changed. I powered it up and typed in the old password, Rangers 1994. It worked. His email was the first place I looked. I searched Adam and dozens of threads popped up, most were harmless, memories from years of friendship. But one stood out. It was from the same encrypted address Nadia had mentioned. The subject line simply read, "Proof of Adam's fraud." I clicked it open. It contained a single PDF attachment. My heart pounded as I downloaded it to a USB drive. Next, I scoured his browser history. That's when my stomach turned. Kyle had been searching things like inheritance rights without a will and how to contest insurance payouts. I hadn't realized it until that moment, but he was named as my emergency contact on all kinds of forms, my work paperwork, even my old life insurance policy. Maybe he hadn't meant for me to die, but he clearly thought he could profit from the idea I was gone for good. I unplugged the USB and backed away from the desk, careful to leave everything exactly as I'd found it. Just as I was about to slip out, something caught my eye on the kitchen counter, a sonogram photo. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Clara's name was printed in the corner, with a date only 3 weeks old. And the gestational age, about 9 weeks. I did the math in my head. The conception date lined up exactly with the week she left me. I felt sick. I put the photo back exactly where it had been and slipped out the door. When I got back to my rented studio, I stared at the USB drive for a long time before plugging it into my laptop. The PDF was a forged financial statement, supposedly showing I'd funneled company money into offshore accounts. It looked professional. If I hadn't known it was a lie, I might have believed it myself. I spent the rest of the night combing through metadata, looking for clues about who created it. But the file had been scrubbed clean. It was almost dawn when I realized something obvious. Whoever sent that email had a vested interest in seeing me discredited, maybe to justify why I'd run away. I shut the laptop and pressed my palms to my eyes. I'd been so desperate to prove people cared that I hadn't considered how easy it was to exploit my absence. Kyle stood to gain everything I'd left behind, sentimental stuff, a few small insurance policies, and, apparently, Clara herself. But I still didn't know if the baby was his or mine. The thought of them together made me want to tear the walls down. That morning, I decided to do something even riskier. I would reveal myself. But only to one person. Someone who might be able to help me untangle this without tipping off Kyle or Clara. I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on my cousin Tessa. She and I were never especially close, but she'd always been decent to me. She was a lawyer, a good one, and I figured if anyone could keep a secret, it would be her. I used a burner number and texted, "Meet me tonight. It's about Adam." 10 minutes later, she replied, "Who is this?" I swallowed hard and typed the only thing I could think of, "Just trust me." 9 p.m. The old diner off Highway 6. If she didn't come, I'd figure something else out. But if she did, I might finally have an ally in this nightmare. I spent the whole day pacing the apartment, rehearsing what I'd say to Tessa. How do you explain to someone that you faked your own death, and then found out your best friend and your ex were plotting something behind your back? When the clock finally hit 8:30, I pulled on a baseball cap and a hoodie and drove out to the diner. It was one of those old roadside places with flickering neon and cracked vinyl booths. I parked in the shadows at the edge of the lot. Tessa's car was already there. She was sitting in a booth near the window, scrolling her phone. She looked tired, her hair pulled into a low ponytail, a takeout coffee in front of her. For a second, I hesitated at the door. What if she freaked out? What if she thought I'd lost my mind and called the cops? But I didn't have a choice. I stepped inside and slid into the booth across from her. She didn't look up right away. "It's late," she said, still reading her phone. "You have 5 minutes before I leave." I pulled off my cap. She looked up. Her mouth fell open. "Adam?" I shushed her, glancing nervously around. Only the cashier and a bored-looking trucker were in the place. She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "What? How? You're supposed to be dead." "I know," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I had to disappear." Her eyes were huge. "People thought you killed yourself." "I didn't. And I can explain. But you have to promise me you won't tell anyone." "Adam, please, Tess. Just listen." She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay. Talk." So I did. I told her everything, the loneliness that drove me to vanish, the funeral, the look on Clara's face, the embezzlement email, the sonogram in Kyle's kitchen. I expected her to call me insane. Instead, she just sat there, absorbing it all, her expression going from disbelief to something more like anger. When I finished, she pushed her coffee aside. "You realize you're in serious legal jeopardy, right? You staged your own death. That's fraud." "I know. But I'm not trying to scam anyone. I had to know the truth. And now I think Kyle was behind the email. Maybe Clara too. Tessa rubbed her temples. Do you have any proof they were working together? I have the fake financial statement. And I have screenshots of Kyle researching my insurance. Isn't that enough? She gave me a level stare. It's suspicious, but not conclusive. And if you come back now, you'll look unstable. Anything you accuse them of will be overshadowed by the fact you faked your own death. I hadn't thought of it that way. So what do I do? I asked, my voice hoarse. She sighed. You need to gather hard evidence. Emails. Bank transfers. Anything that shows motive. And you need to decide what your endgame is. Are you coming back? Pressing charges? Or just exposing them? I didn't know the answer. Part of me wanted to blow up their lives the way they tried to blow up mine. But another part just wanted to disappear for real, to let the past burn itself out without me. Tessa reached across the table and touched my hand. I'll help you. But you have to promise me you'll be careful. If they're willing to do this much to get rid of you, or profit off your absence, there's no telling what else they'd do if they knew you were alive. I promise, I said. We agreed she'd quietly look into Clara's finances and any recent legal filings that might connect her to Kyle. In the meantime, I'd try to find a way to confirm whether the baby was mine. Before I left, she gripped my hand again. Whatever happens, don't trust them. Not for a second. I nodded and slipped back into the night. Driving home, my mind was a hurricane. I'd gone into this thinking I'd prove no one cared. Now I was uncovering something more like a conspiracy. When I got back to my apartment, there was an email waiting in my burner inbox. No subject line. No sender. Just 3 words, stop digging. Now. I read it over and over, my skin crawling. Somebody knew. And they were watching me. I didn't sleep after that email. I kept the lights off and sat by the window, staring down at the empty street. Every time a car crept by or a shadow moved, my heart stuttered. I knew I hadn't been careful enough. Breaking into Kyle's condo was reckless. Meeting Tessa in person was reckless. Even using burner accounts didn't guarantee I couldn't be traced. By dawn, I decided the only way forward was to push harder. If someone wanted me to stop, it meant I was close to something important. But first, I needed answers about the baby. I still had access to Clara's medical records. Years ago, when we were together, she'd set me up as her emergency contact, and I'd helped her navigate an online portal during a health scare. I knew the login credentials. It felt dirty, but I logged in from a secure VPN and pulled up her latest records. My hands shook as I scrolled through appointment notes and ultrasound images. Estimated conception date, February 6th. The day she told me she needed space to think. That was the weekend she said she was visiting her sister out of town. I remembered it vividly because I'd called her that Saturday night, and she'd ignored every call. I swallowed hard. The timing didn't prove whether the baby was mine or Kyle's. But it did confirm she'd been lying to me. I copied everything to a private folder and logged out. Next, I called Tessa using a fresh burner number. I got into her records, I told her. It lines up with when she started pulling away. Tessa's voice was tense. And she never told you she was pregnant? No. Not a word. She was quiet for a moment. Adam, this might be about money. If she can claim you abandoned her, and the child, it could help her access any benefits you left behind. I felt sick. I need to talk to her, I said. Face to face. Maybe she'll admit it. Tessa made a strangled sound. You can't just walk up to her. You're legally dead. I don't care. Then at least let me come with you. No. If I show up with a lawyer, she'll panic. I hung up before she could argue. That afternoon, I parked across from Clara's office. I watched her walk out just after 5, her shoulders slumped, hand unconsciously resting against her belly. I waited until she reached her car, then stepped out of mine and approached. She froze when she saw me. Her face went white as paper. Clara, I said quietly, we need to talk. Her lips moved soundlessly. She backed up against her car like she thought I was going to attack her. You're dead, she whispered. No. I'm right here. Tears welled up in her eyes. How? Why? I faked it, I said. And I'm not sorry. I needed to know the truth. She covered her mouth, shaking her head over and over. Clara, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, is it mine? Her gaze darted away. Look at me, I demanded. She wiped her face. I don't know. It felt like the ground tilted under my feet. Jesus, Clara, I whispered. Was it Kyle's? I don't know, she cried. I swear, Adam, I didn't plan for any of this. But you planned to move on with him. I didn't, he was there, and you were gone because you made me feel like I didn't matter. We were both crying now, standing in the freezing wind as people walked by, staring. I never wanted you to die, she choked. I never wanted this. But when you disappeared, Kyle said, he said you'd been stealing, that you'd run away. My voice came out hoarse. And you believed him. She closed her eyes. I didn't know what to believe. I was angry. And then when I found out I was pregnant, so you just let everyone think I was a criminal. I didn't know what else to do. We stood there in silence, breath misting between us. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. When I got back to the car, my phone buzzed. A text from Tessa, call me. I found something. My hands trembled as I dialed. When she picked up, her voice was tight. Kyle took out a life insurance policy on you. My chest went hollow. After you disappeared? I asked. No, she said. 2 weeks before. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. 2 weeks before, I repeated numbly. You're sure? Tessa exhaled shakily. Positive. I checked the filings. It was a supplemental policy you apparently signed, but I'd bet my license that signature isn't yours. I leaned back against the seat, my heart jackhammering. He forged it. It looks that way. The payout was sizable, 6 figures. Jesus Christ. She went on, her voice careful. And Clara's name is listed as a secondary beneficiary. I swallowed. So if Kyle couldn't collect, she could. That's what it looks like. I stared out at the darkening sky. I had started this thinking I'd find out who cared about me. Instead, I'd stumbled into the ugliest betrayal imaginable. Tess, I said quietly, I think Kyle was planning something worse than just ruining my reputation. I know, she said, just as quietly. For a minute neither of us spoke. I felt like I was suspended over a pit, the last rope fraying beneath me. Finally, she said, I'll keep digging. But you need to be careful. If he realizes you're alive, and that you know, I get it. We hung up, and I sat in the car until the cold seeped into my bones. Eventually, I forced myself to drive back to the studio apartment. My hands were trembling so badly I almost sideswiped a parked car. Inside, I locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. All this time, I'd thought Kyle just wanted Clara, or maybe the insurance money. But forging a policy before I disappeared? That was premeditated. Calculated. And Clara, her face when I confronted her told me she was scared, but not that she was innocent. I couldn't pretend anymore that this was some misunderstanding. I powered up my laptop and started compiling everything, screenshots, emails, the PDF from Kyle's computer, the policy documents Tessa sent. I saved it all in an encrypted folder, with copies on multiple flash drives. When I was done, it was past midnight. I stared at the files, my chest aching. Part of me still didn't want to believe it. I'd known Kyle since we were 12. He'd been at every milestone of my life. College. My first real job. Even the night Clara and I met. I remembered how he'd nudged me toward her, joking, don't screw this up. And all the while, he'd been waiting for the chance to take everything. I closed the laptop and scrubbed a hand over my face. I knew I had 2 choices, stay hidden and let them think they'd won. Or come back from the dead and burn their world to the ground. But if I reappeared without airtight evidence, I'd end up in prison for insurance fraud and falsifying my own death. I needed one last piece. Proof Kyle forged that policy. And if I was going to get it, I'd have to see him face to face. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to a hardware store and bought a cheap voice recorder. I stuffed it in my pocket, my hands clammy. It felt surreal, like I was starring in a bad crime show. I parked near Kyle's condo and waited. At 6 p.m. He pulled in, wearing a suit and carrying a gym bag. He looked normal. Like any other guy coming home after work. I followed him up the stairs, my heart in my throat. When he unlocked the door, I slipped in behind him. He turned, and for a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then his eyes widened. Adam? I shut the door behind me. Hey, buddy. He backed up a step. You're supposed to be dead? I finished. Yeah. I get that a lot lately. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. You look like you've seen a ghost, I said, my voice calm even though I felt anything but. What? How? I stepped closer. I know about the insurance policy. Color drained from his face. And I know you forged my signature. Adam, listen, no, my voice cracked. You're going to listen. You're going to tell me exactly what you did. And why? He swallowed, eyes darting to the door. Look, man, let's just sit down, sit down. After you tried to erase me? His hands came up in a placating gesture. I didn't, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Then how was it supposed to be? I demanded. He looked away. I was in debt. I didn't have a choice. Bullshit. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, brittle as glass. Finally, he met my gaze. You were always going to leave everything to waste, he said, voice low. You didn't appreciate any of it. Not the job. Not Clara. You were just coasting. And I was drowning. So you decided to kill me? His eyes went flat. It was easier if you were gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. It was easier if you were gone. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. You really believed you deserved everything I had, I said hoarsely. He didn't answer, but his jaw flexed. So what was the plan, Kyle? I pressed. My voice was shaking. You forged the policy, feed that fake embezzlement story, and then, what? Wait for me to actually kill myself? I thought you might, he muttered, eyes sliding away. My vision went white around the edges. You were my best friend, I whispered. You were in my way, he shot back, his voice rising. You had everything handed to you, job connections, family money, Clara, and you didn't even care. I cared more than you ever knew, I said. Then why did you disappear? Because people like you made me feel worthless. He let out a shaky laugh. And look at you now. Hiding in cheap motels, skulking around like a criminal. Because you made me one. I snapped. He didn't deny it. The rage in my chest was a living thing, coiling and thrashing. But I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't lose control. I needed him to keep talking. You and Clara, I said quietly. Was she in on it? He hesitated. She didn't know about the policy, he said finally. She believed what I told her. That you'd run off. That you were ashamed. You're lying. She didn't know, he insisted. Not about that part. And the baby? His expression flickered, something like regret, or maybe fear. I don't know if it's mine, he said. It was complicated. My stomach twisted. You disgust me, I whispered. Kyle rubbed his face with shaking hands. Look, Adam, you can still walk away. Let everyone think you're dead. Just, let this end. That's not happening. If you go public, you'll go to jail too, he snapped. You think anyone's going to care why you disappeared? You faked your own death, for God's sake. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather face prison than let you get away with this. I turned to leave. Don't do this, he called after me. His voice cracked. Please. I didn't look back. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. My hands were shaking as I fished the voice recorder from my pocket. The red light blinked steadily. I had it all. I drove straight to Tessa's office. She was waiting, her hair pulled back, eyes bloodshot. I handed her the recorder. Everything, I said. A confession. She didn't say anything, just took it and plugged it into her computer. We sat side by side in silence as Kyle's voice filled the room. When it ended, she looked at me, her face pale. That's enough to open an investigation, she said softly. But you understand, if you come forward, your own charges will be serious. I know. You'll probably never work in your field again. I nodded. And Clara? She asked. I looked away. I don't know, I said. Part of me still wanted to believe she'd been manipulated. Another part knew she'd made her choices, too. Tessa exhaled. I'll call the authorities. But you need to think about how you want this to end. If you want a deal, you have to be the one to tell them first. I rubbed my face, bone-tired. I'm done hiding, I said. She nodded. You should get some rest, she said. Tomorrow's going to be a lot. I managed a humorless smile. You think? She almost smiled back. I left her office feeling like my body weighed 1,000 pounds. Outside, dawn was starting to break. The world looked deceptively normal, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't torn my entire life to pieces. Back at the studio, I sat on the edge of the bed. There was still one person I needed to see before everything exploded. Clara. Not because I thought she'd fix any of it, or because I expected an apology. But because I needed her to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was small. It's me, I said. She sucked in a shaky breath. Can we meet? I asked. There was a long pause. Yes, she whispered. Tomorrow. One last time. The next morning felt like the last day of an old life. I showered, shaved, and put on clean clothes, something I hadn't bothered to do in weeks. If I was going to face Clara, I wanted to look like myself again. Not the wreck I'd been hiding as. We agreed to meet at a park near her mother's house. It was early enough that the paths were empty except for a few dog walkers and joggers. I spotted her sitting alone on a bench by the pond. She looked up when I approached, eyes rimmed red. Hi, she said, her voice brittle. I sat a few feet away. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I thought you were dead. I know. I thought I'd never see you again. I stared at the water, where a pair of ducks glided across the reflection of the gray sky. Did you love me? I asked quietly. Her breath caught. I did, she said. More than anything. But, everything got so complicated. Because of Kyle. She closed her eyes. Because of me. I turned to her. I need to know the truth. All of it. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't know about the insurance policy. I swear to you. When you disappeared, Kyle told me you'd been stealing from your company. That you'd run off because you were ashamed. And you believed him. I didn't want to, she whispered. But you were gone. And when I found out I was pregnant. I didn't know what to do. Is it mine? She pressed her lips together. I don't know. Did you sleep with him before you left me? Her shoulders shook. Once, she whispered. We were drunk. It was a mistake. I closed my eyes. So you left me because you were guilty, I said. I left you because I thought you deserved better than someone who'd betray you, she choked. And then you stayed with him. She wiped her face. Because he was there. Because I was scared. Because I didn't know how to fix any of it. I felt like all the anger I'd carried was burning itself out, leaving something colder behind. I don't know if I believe you, I said. I don't expect you to. We sat in silence as the wind rippled the surface of the pond. Finally, I stood. I'm going to the police, I said. I have a recording of Kyle confessing. Her eyes widened. He forged the policy, I continued. He tried to make it look like I stole money. Maybe he didn't plan to kill me outright, but he wanted me gone. And you helped him, whether you meant to or not. I'm so sorry, she whispered, voice breaking. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I'm not coming back to this life, I said. Even if the charges against me are reduced. I can't. Too much is broken. She looked up at me with wet, desperate eyes. What about the baby? If it's mine, I'll do what's right, I said. But I won't be part of this mess anymore. Her shoulders slumped. I started to walk away but stopped after a few steps. For what it's worth, I said without turning around, I hope you figure out who you are without him. I left her there, sitting alone on the bench as the morning brightened around us. On the drive back to Tessa's office, I felt a strange peace. Like I'd finally stopped running, from them, from myself, from the past. When I walked in, she was on the phone with someone. She covered the receiver and looked up at me. You ready? She asked. I nodded. She finished her call and stood. I've spoken to the DA's office. They're willing to discuss a deal if you cooperate fully. It won't be pretty, Adam, but it's better than letting Kyle control the story. I sat down across from her desk. What happens next? I asked. You give them everything you have. You tell them everything you did. Then you let them decide. I swallowed. Okay. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing. I wasn't sure I believed that. But for the first time in months, I felt something that almost resembled relief. I spent the next 2 hours making a formal statement, handing over files, explaining every step of what I'd done, and what I'd discovered. By the end of it, I was wrung out and hollow. The detective who took my statement closed his folder and looked me in the eye. You understand you're still in serious trouble, he said. I do. But you also understand you probably stopped something worse from happening. I nodded. He exhaled. We'll be in touch. I left the station feeling like I'd aged 10 years. When I got back to the apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won. You haven't. I read it twice, my stomach turning. It wasn't over. Not yet. I stared at that text for a long time. You think you've won. You haven't. I knew it had to be Kyle. But part of me wondered if Clara had sent it. If she was angrier, or more complicit, than she'd ever let on. The police had my statement. Tessa had the files. But nothing was guaranteed. If the DA decided to press full charges against me, I could still lose everything. I tried to tell myself I'd done the right thing. That no matter what happened, I'd finally drag the truth into the light. But the truth didn't feel like much comfort as I sat alone in the tiny apartment, listening to the hum of the radiator and waiting for a knock on the door. 2 days passed. No word from the police. No more texts. On the third morning, Tessa called. They arrested him, she said without preamble. I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. Kyle? Yes. Early this morning. Fraud, forgery, attempted insurance scam. They're still deciding what other charges apply. I closed my eyes and pressed my hand over my mouth. Relief and dread crashed over me in equal measure. And Clara? No charges yet, she said carefully. They don't have proof she knew about the policy. But, Adam, they're going to want to talk to her. If she tries to protect him, it could get worse. I swallowed hard. She sent me a text, I said. Or maybe it was him. Threatening me. Tessa's voice went cold. Forward it to me. I'll give it to the detectives. I did as she asked, and she promised to call if anything changed. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet and tried to imagine what Kyle was thinking in a holding cell. Was he still convinced he'd been justified? Did he blame me for not rolling over and disappearing for good? I didn't have an answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop, pictures of me and Kyle in college, laughing over cheap beer. Pictures of Clara and me at my sister's wedding, her hand resting on my chest. I felt like I was staring at strangers. Maybe I was. The next morning, I got the call I'd been bracing for. The DA's office. They wanted me to come in and finalize my cooperation agreement. I spent 3 hours in a windowless room, going over every detail again, answering every question. When it was over, the prosecutor looked at me over folded hands. You understand you're not walking away from this clean, he said. I know. You'll be charged with filing a false police report, obstruction, and insurance fraud. But in exchange for your cooperation and the evidence you provided, we're recommending probation and restitution rather than jail time. I nodded, my throat tight. If you violate the agreement or attempt to disappear again, he continued, the deal is off. I understand. He paused, studying me. Why did you do it, Mr. Walsh? I hesitated. I wanted to know if anyone cared, I said honestly. His gaze didn't soften. And did they? I thought of my parents, too stunned to speak at my funeral. Of Clara, crying into Kyle's shoulder. Of Kyle himself, forging signatures and telling himself he deserved my life. Some did, I said quietly. But not the ones I thought. When I left the courthouse, the winter sun was blinding. For the first time in months, I didn't have to hide. I went back to the apartment, packed my few things, and drove to Tessa's house. She opened the door and pulled me into a hug so fierce I almost broke. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I didn't feel proud. Just empty. We sat in her kitchen, drinking coffee in silence. Eventually, she cleared her throat. "There's something else you should know," she said. I braced myself. "Clara went to the police this morning. She gave a statement. She says she's willing to testify against Kyle." I searched her face for any sign she was lying. "She admitted she lied about some things," Tessa went on. "But she insists she didn't know about the forgery. That she thought you were running away from your guilt." I stared down at my coffee. "Do you believe her?" I asked. Tessa sighed. "I think she's telling the truth about some of it. But maybe not all." I didn't know if it mattered anymore. I was out. Kyle was in custody. The truth, or at least some version of it, was finally coming to light. But the life I'd had before was never coming back. I didn't think I wanted it to. I spent the next week sleeping on Tessa's couch. The police came by twice more, asking follow-up questions. Each time, I told them everything I knew. Each time, I felt a little lighter, like I was peeling off layers I didn't need anymore. My parents called after the news broke. I hadn't spoken to them since before the funeral. When my mother's voice crackled over the line, thin and trembling, I almost hung up. "Adam," she whispered. "Is it really you?" "It's me," I said. There was a long silence. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why did you do this to us?" I didn't know how to explain the emptiness that had driven me to disappear. The bone-deep certainty that no one would notice if I was gone. So I just said, "I'm sorry." Another pause. "Come home," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." "I can't," I whispered. "Not yet." I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, Clara called. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. Then I listened. Her voice was ragged, almost unrecognizable. "I don't know if you'll ever believe me," she said. "But I never wanted this. I never wanted you hurt. I thought you were gone forever, and I hated myself for what I did. I'm sorry." I replayed it twice, feeling nothing. The next morning, the DA's office called again. Kyle had been formally charged. Fraud, forgery, attempted insurance fraud, conspiracy. His bail was set impossibly high. He wasn't getting out anytime soon. I asked about Clara. "She's not facing charges," the prosecutor said. "Her cooperation was significant. But she'll likely be called as a witness." I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. That afternoon, I drove to the park where I'd met Clara. It was empty, gray sky pressing down on the bare trees. I sat on the same bench, hands in my pockets, and watched the pond. A couple of ducks paddled aimlessly across the water. I tried to picture the life I'd had, coming here with her, with Kyle, with people I thought were my foundation. It felt like a movie I'd watched too many times. When I finally stood, it was with the quiet certainty that I wasn't going back. Not to them. Not to that life. I spent the next week closing out what loose ends I could. Tessa helped me set up meetings with financial advisors, with a counselor, with the DA's office to finalize the plea deal. I agreed to probation, mandatory counseling, and full restitution for any costs my disappearance had caused. The judge looked me in the eye and told me I was lucky to be alive, and luckier still to be avoiding prison. I didn't argue. After the hearing, Tessa hugged me in the courthouse hallway. "You're free," she said. "I don't feel free," I admitted. "You will," she promised. A week later, I packed my car with everything I hadn't already abandoned. A few clothes. My laptop. A box of old photos I wasn't sure why I'd kept. Before I left town, I stopped once more at the diner where I'd first revealed myself to Tessa. I sat in the same booth and ordered black coffee. I thought about all the ways this story could have ended. Me dead, for real. Me in prison. Me disappearing again. But here I was, alive and unburdened, with no plan and no one left to pretend for. When the waitress brought the check, she smiled at me. Just a polite, tired smile, nothing special. But it felt real in a way nothing had in a long time. I paid and walked out into the morning light. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a beginning.